Hello, everyone. Welcome to MSG's webinar series, The Stories We Tell, where we have had the honor of hearing personal and intimate stories this month from various speakers across the nation. My name is Angie, and I'm the Executive Director of Mustard Seed Generation, and I am so glad you are joining us this evening. I see some new and familiar names here from our previous sessions. We are so glad that you're tuning in again. I want to encourage you to turn on your cameras to have as close of an in-person feel as possible. We would love to see all your beautiful faces. And although this session is recorded, we will be protecting and respecting our participants' privacy, so faces will not be shown in our recording post. If we can move to the next slide. Before we move any further, I wanted to share the purpose of the series. So MSG staff created this webinar as an opportunity to hear and amplify the voices in the Korean American community that we may deeply resonate with. So the agenda for tonight is hearing our speaker, Tasha Jun, share personal stories. And the stories will be followed up by a fun keyword activity, which I will explain in more detail later. We also will have a brief time of Q&A, so if there are any questions, please use the chat box to ask away. Last, we'll be sharing about ways that you can partner with us in our mission to eradicate barriers to mental health in the Korean American community. And this month, we started an end of the year fundraising campaign to raise $5,000. And we also have a generous donor who is matching your dollar, so you can make double the impact this month. Gloria will be sharing more about our campaign at the end of the session. But you don't have to wait until then. You may notice that at the top of my background on this slide, there is a QR code that will directly lead you to our fundraising campaign. And so this QR code will be present on every slide for the rest of this evening. We also have a very fun raffle activity that is exclusive to webinar series participants that I'll also share a little more about shortly. But if we can move to the next slide, as a virtual series, we may not be able to interact and connect the same way as an in-person event, but we wanted to make it as interactive and engaging as possible. So we have a few ways that you can do that. And first is to use the chat box to comment or ask questions and engage with one another. So if there are any questions, any questions that you would like to ask our speaker, please DM Gloria Kim, who will relay the questions over to me for the brief questions and answers time. So let's test out the chat box. So please share with us where you are tuning in from, city and state or country. I am currently tuning in from Beaverton, Oregon. So let's hear it in the chat. So right now I see Bogota, Colombia, Seattle, Washington, Indiana, Beaverton, Oregon, Austin, Texas, Seoul, Atlanta, wow, Philly suburbs, okay, Albany, New York, Orange County, California. Wow, such diverse time zones, my goodness. Thank you everyone for engaging with us. Another way that you can engage with us is through the React button. There are so many emojis to choose from, but you can click on the React button on the bottom of the platform to share your reaction throughout the session. I know I'll be using this function a lot, and I hope that you do as well. And as mentioned earlier, we have an activity that is exclusive to our webinar series. So all of the participants in our series are automatically entered into a raffle opportunity just for tuning in. And we've been giving away one customized Yeti coffee mug in our webinar series since last week. And with tonight being our last webinar, we will be giving away a Yeti mug and also two Tasha Jun books, Tell Me the Dream Again. And we'll be announcing 3 winners at the end of the evening. but you must be present. You must be here still to receive the prize. So I hope that everyone sticks around till the end. And then for the fundraising campaign that we have going on for the month of December, your donations through the QR code or link enters you in for a raffle to win prizes, which include an air fryer, alabaster Bible bundle, or portable speakers. And the greater the amount you donate, the higher your chances to win. And I have full faith in our community to help us reach our goal in this fun way. So without any further delay, I wanted to introduce our speaker, Tasha Jun. She is a biracial Korean American who grew up in a multicultural home. And because of that, she spent her life navigating cultural collisions and liminal space. And she writes about faith, cultural and ethnic identity, and living with the shalom ache. So writing has been an avenue that God has led her through pain and towards the hope of shalom. She lives in the Midwest with her husband and 3 kids. Tasha also recently released a book this past May titled Tell Me the Dream Again, which we are giving away today at the end of the session. And it includes intimate stories and reflections on family, ethnicity, faith, and belonging. And it is written in a way that is so beautiful. It really beautifully articulates the nuanced Korean American experiences. So I highly recommend it. And without further ado, Tasha Jun, everyone.
Hello, thank you so much. Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much, Angie. Hello, everyone. Oh, good. I can see some of your faces. Oh, no, now they're gone. Oh, yeah, if I could, I would love to just sit with each of you and just have the honor and the gift of hearing a glimpse of your story. If that's not strange, that's like one of my favorite things in the whole world. And I wish that even just being here, that there was opportunity for that, to be able to sit with each of you and just get a glimpse of who you are and how your stories have shaped who you are. I am so grateful for MSG and the little bit that I have learned about what Mustard Seed Generation is doing and how you guys are creating and focusing on mental health and creating safe spaces for our stories to be shared. And also by doing so, guiding more of us towards healing and flourishing. That is no small thing. So being here tonight is just an honor. And yeah, I hope that I will cross paths with every single one of you here, as audacious as that is. If we can, this is something I like to do. And I know a lot of people before speaking do this, probably prior, but now that I'm seeing your faces, I'm wondering if we can just take like a few deep breaths together. It will help me. And even just a few deep breaths just to kind of remind ourselves where we are, even if it's on screen, just kind of showing up full and here and present. So I'm just going to take a couple of deep breaths, and if you want to, feel free to do that with me, and then we'll go ahead and dig in. Whew. I can like feel it in my shoulders. So in Parker Palmer's book, On the Brink of Everything, he writes this: true self is the self with which we arrive on earth, the self that simply wants us to be who we were born to be. True self tells us who we are, where we are planted in the ecosystem of life, what right action looks like for us, and how we can grow fully into our own potential. As an old Hasidic tale reminds us, our mission is to live into the shape of true self, not the shape of someone else's self. Before he died, Rabbi Zusia said, "In the world to come, they will not ask me, 'Why were you not Moses?' They will ask me, 'Why were you not Zusia?'" So if you can take a minute and put yourself in that little clip from the Hasidic tale and just think about yourself being asked, why were you not? And not another person, but your name. So think of that in your head before I share a little bit more of my story. My story, like many stories, is full of pages of hiding. Early on, I was taught that assimilation would somehow lead me to belonging, and that is a lot of what my book is about. Um, Most of it came from, I think, encountering the outside world. But assimilation is also what I watched in my mom. It's how she survived. She immigrated to the US in her 20s, and a lot of what she had to do to survive was assimilate. For me, it was different. But at some point along the way, I believed that I needed to assimilate, which meant to hide and erase large parts of myself and how God made me, as Parker Palmer said, who I was created to be able to belong anywhere, to be able to belong in the spaces that I was in. And tonight I want to read you a story. It's just one of the many stories that I share in my book to highlight the way that assimilation and hiding, the stories of my heritage and skin harmed me, and how going back to those assimilated places, those parts, those stories that I didn't want to go back to, and kind of rewriting some of those stories has healed some of these hidden parts and a lot of the pain that I carried with me for years, and also given me hope. So this comes from chapter 4 of my book. It's seaweed soup. So just sit back and relax. We're having, an adult storytelling time for our inner children. Food is everything we are. It's an extension of nationalist feeling, ethnic feeling, your personal history, your province, your region, your tribe, your grandma. It's inseparable from those from the get-go. That's from Anthony Bourdain. She stood at the kitchen stove, leaning on her right leg. Her tiny left foot rested sideways against her right knee, her leg lifted to resemble a triangle. Her back was toward me, bent over a steaming pot. She dipped a burnt-tip wooden cooking spoon, into the pot, tasting the broth every few minutes. Growing up, I watched her stand at the kitchen counters like this in every house we lived in. She ate leftover rice mixed into cold water for breakfast with an open glass of kimchi nearby. She made ice-cold naengmyeon throughout the summer and then made sujebi, sundubu, doenjang, and kimchi jjigae in the colder months. She was always making something during the day, and she rarely sat down. As a girl, I watched her stir, spoon, and slurp. When I was young, I often requested 2 simple Korean soups, tteokguk filled with chewy rice cakes and mukguk filled with sweet radishes. I was reluctant about most of the other dishes, especially the seaweed soup that resembled a bowl of the ocean with wet rectangles of seaweed that stuck to my spoon and tongue the way it wrapped around my legs in the ocean. There was something claustrophobic about it, a fear that I wouldn't be able to untangle myself. If I lost control, where would the seaweed and the current it swam in end up bringing me? When my mom stood over these pots of spicy stew and earth-colored broth, I knew she was remembering. Her mind was elsewhere, and memories I didn't know or understand were being stirred up alongside the softening vegetables. I often turned away her offered spoonful with a scrunched up nose and an unyielding no thanks. I tried to ignore the fact that I was refusing more than a taste of soup. I told myself it was okay if I'd rather eat chicken noodles like the rest of the kids. I told myself it was only a matter of taste and preference, nothing more. Right after our first son was born, my parents came to visit and help us transition into parenthood. On their last day with us, my mom stood at her stove over a huge pot making seaweed soup. She stood on one leg, as she always did, and I was a child again. Peeking under the lid of the pot, my mom rambled on at me from the kitchen of our open layout apartment while I nursed my son at the couch. She told me how important it was for me to eat this particular soup. All Korean women eat it after giving birth, she said. I didn't teach you enough. Then she insisted on having me try some while she walked across the room with a spoonful. She gently shoved it into my mouth while I tried to make sure none of it dripped onto my newborn son's face. She raised an eyebrow as if to say, "See, you need it. I'm right." She looked at me, waiting for a response. I nodded, holding my eyes steady so they wouldn't roll into the back of my head, and she returned to the kitchen with the dripping spoon. She retrieved another spoonful and shoved it into my dad's mouth while he stood next to her. She stirred the pot once more and said to me, "Finish the whole pot when you're done feeding." I was hormonal and tired, and even though I told her I'd eat it once she was gone, I didn't. I took a few tiny spoonfuls, then poured the rest down the kitchen sink. My son sat in his bouncy seat beside me as the liquid flowed down the drain like a disappearing waterfall. Almost a year later, I was in a bookstore pushing my son around in his stroller while he fisted Cheerios, and I stopped in the international cookbook aisle. I found a beautiful front-facing hardcover cookbook beside it, as if it were hiding. Front-facing hardcover Turkish cookbook, and then spotted a thin paperback Korean cookbook beside it, as if it were hiding. I pulled it out and found an inviting picture of noodles with perfectly placed vegetables on the cover. I flipped through a few pages, and then there it was, seaweed soup. I began reading the author's description about the Korean tradition of giving new mothers the special healing soup. For thousands of years, Korean mothers have made myeokguk for their Korean daughters when they became mothers. When I became a mother, I dumped mine down the drain. Standing in the busy Barnes & Noble aisle, clutching book pages in my hand to keep them open to the seaweed soup spread, I cried like a baby, right onto the page. I bought the book I'd ruined with my tears, tears that finally fell over all the years of rejection. From our very beginnings, we are meant to be fed by our mothers. Upon birth, our bodies are still connected by umbilical cords, tangible evidence of God's design for our nourishment. Even after we enter the world and that cord is severed, we're never meant to be severed from the influence of our mothers as they shape our lives and identities outside the womb. The cultural palettes God has given us aren't accidents. They aren't side notes or accessories. God speaks unconditional love directly through the unique tastes, textures, scents, and appearances of the foods of our mothers and fathers. These tastes aren't meant to be fodder for ridicule or rejection, or to be divorced from our identity as his beloved children. They are divine gifts. It wasn't just my mother's culture I was resisting every time I opposed an offered spoonful of soup or pretended I didn't crave Korean food. I was resisting God's loving intention. I was resisting being loved, and I was resisting myself. So I share later on like a follow-up in the book to this story. So this is in chapter 10, Jesus and John. On the plane ride to bring our daughter home from Korea 6 years ago, now 7, we flew Korean Air. The flight attendant brought us a tray of bibimbap, and I excitedly squeezed my toothpaste-like tube of gochujang onto the rice mixed with vegetables. I noticed another container with the lid lifted to release steam. The steam seeped out of the opening, swirling toward me, an invitation of strength and grace. I watched it and felt the weight of being in between cultures, literally flying in airspace between the West and the East, reaching back toward Korea no matter how far I've been thrust away from it. I pulled back the lid and saw the dark pieces of seaweed floating in the liquid and realized it was myeokguk. I looked around to see if others had it on their trays and whether they'd eaten theirs. The woman in the row to the right of me moved her perfectly round spoon with a clump of rice on top toward the bowl of soup and dipped it in, adding broth and seaweed to her spoonful. It seems just like Koreans that even on an airplane, they would offer their most comforting and traditional tastes. I remembered how I poured a whole homemade pot of myeokguk and a part of myself down the drain. I thought of all the things I'd rejected and all the things I'd hidden, and silent tears slid down my dried out face. I pulled the plastic lid all the way off, and though I knew I should use a spoon to be polite, I lifted the bowl and drank the entire contents, letting it gush down and caress my tongue, my throat, and eventually the insides of my midsection with forgiveness. It was a baptism of what I once was, a rebirth from rejection to the redemption of embrace. With each trembling swallow, I nourished the imago Dei within me. So that's it. But according to doctors and mental health professionals, which we have a lot of here, there's a growing body of scientific research out there that supports the healing power of storytelling. Or I've heard it just recently actually called narrative therapy, which I didn't even know that there was such a thing with an official name. And while the scientific research is so helpful and good to have, I know from my own experience that sharing my story, and even multiple times, even here tonight, I feel it, sharing my story, and then also being someone who creates spaces for others to do the same thing has been so incredibly transformational for my life and for those that are around me. The power of shared stories has changed everything for me. So I write this in my book, but I say the lie of assimilation is that it leads to belonging. And what I have learned over decades is that the opposite of that is actually what's true. It's not hiding our stories or parts of ourselves, even the parts that are really hard to talk about, that give us belonging. It's actually sharing them. It's sharing them that actually creates spaces of healing and belonging. So sharing our stories brings other stories into the light. And so with whatever else we do tonight and whatever else is going on in this season for you, and I know this is a crazy season, there are so many pressures, there are so many, and even pressure to create stories about the season for us and those we love. And there are so many stories that bubble to the surface that I think this time can remind us of, at least for me, of, not just joy, but loss. And so with that, I hope that you will walk away from tonight and even carry with you um, the truth that your story is precious, not in a cheesy way, but precious as in irreplaceable, all the parts of it. And that it has that kind of power, the power that can bring light into darkness and into dark spaces in your life and in the lives of those around you. So that's all I have for tonight. I was reading a little quickly, but yeah, thank you for letting me share.
Oh, Tasha, thank you so much for sharing with us just a little bit of your life and story, and also just reminding us of the pain, but also beauty of rediscovering and embracing all of who we are, just all parts of our ethnicity and culture, and even just that profound power of food. The chapter you shared with us on Miyokuk, it's so I feel like the pain, but it's also so healing and moving at the same time. And I really do agree with you on the healing and, even like redemptive and restorative powers of storytelling. So thank you so much for doing that for us. Yeah. Um, yeah. So I'm excited to hear a little more about you as we move into the keyword activity. I was really looking forward to this because we had some very, I noticed some very fun words that came up. So just to describe a little bit for our audience, as staff was planning some of the logistics, we came across the idea of including a keyword activity where we present the speaker with specific keywords. And the idea was to create a more intimate space, a personal space where we get to learn more about our speaker and how certain words are connected to them and how it holds meaning in their lives. So we asked Tasha for 3 words that she could share about. And so we will move to the first keyword. It is Freiburg.
Yeah, so fun. It's fun to hear you say it because it seems so disconnected. So Freiburg, if you don't know, it is this tiny, I guess not tiny, it's a small city in the southwest corner of Germany. And I didn't even know it existed until I was in college and had a chance to visit there. But I ended up moving there right outside of college. I was on staff with Crew. I don't know if you're familiar. So lived there for 2 years and then left, met my husband, and we met on staff with Crew, and we actually moved back there years later. And so I say I've lived there for 3 years, but it was not consecutive years. Yeah, and it is a really special place for both of us. It's a place that, doesn't hold any like family history, but it's kind of a place that we've made special. So we've gone back with our kids when they were really little, and we hope to go back with them again. We are actually going in the spring. So yeah, really fun place.
Okay, so Tasha, I must admit, I had no idea what this word was when you had first shared, so I had to look it up too because I wasn't sure if it was a name or a place or an object or how to even pronounce it. So I had to look up how to pronounce
Oh,
it.
that's so
But
funny.
now we know what it means. It's a location in Germany, and wow, it is really beautiful. It seems like it's going to be kind of full circle. You met your husband there, and you're going back with your children, so that's really beautiful.
Yeah, really
Yes.
fun.
We'll move on to the second word. The second word is 호랑이.
Yeah. So if you have read my book, you know why this word is so significant. But if you haven't, I'll give you like a sneak peek. It's kind of so in the beginning of my book, and really this is from life. My mom had a recurring dream about a horangi that would be up in the night sky that turned into me. And so that's where the title of my book comes from, Tell Me the Dream Again, because I was always asking her to tell me the dream again. And so, yeah, tigers have always been very special to me ever since I was little. And so, yeah, I kind of hold that close. And I could never pronounce it correctly, or my mom would always like shake her head at me every time I said it. So still does today. So.
Thank you for that connection. Yes, I would say for people that have not read her book yet, please go and purchase her book and read it. It is wonderful. And again, it's more elaborated on in the book.
Mhm.
Yes. And then the last word is Joy Luck Club.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people have read Joy Luck Club here or have seen it, or like what generations we have, or if it's diverse, but this was the first movie. Actually, I watched the movie that I watched that um it kind of broke open a floodgate in me, because it was one of the first, again, we're back to stories, the first story that I saw on screen. Or that I witnessed, or even, later read after I went through all of Amy Tan's books, where an Asian American experience was represented, even though it was different than mine, where I saw women that kind of resembled my mom, and things that were done that were cultural, that were more similar to what I experienced at home. And so it was really moving for me. It kind of broke open this moment of this relational healing, this moment between my mom and I, because when I had a sleepover, and someone else had brought the movie to watch, and I was like, I was still like, I'm not interested in that kind of movie. I didn't want to watch it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I saw all these Asian women on the front, and I thought, what is this going to be like? What's this going to be like with my friends who aren't Asian? So I had no interest. So they left the next morning, and it was still there, and someone had left it. So I was going to take it back. So I popped it in, and my mom was actually sleeping behind me. And just in like the intro, where Ming Na Wen is, as June is, reading about that story about the swan's feather. If any of you have seen it, if you haven't, I'm sorry, but she's, reading it, and I am weeping like so loud, like the kind of ugly crying where you can't stop yourself. So it woke my mom up, and she just knew, she knew like why I was crying. And so before there was this, hashtag representation matters, it was like I always go back to that, like, okay, yeah, like it really matters. And my whole body reacted to it. So anyway, that kind of is one of the first times that I saw or just heard a story that was Asian American. And then I quickly dove into all of her books, and then realized, oh, there are Asian American authors, even if there are few. And so that that again was very transformational. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So for those who may be unfamiliar with the movie, and it's also a book. And
Yeah.
so this novel really explores the themes of like cultural identity, generational and relational conflict. And it's from a Chinese American immigrant perspective. So what I recall is a lot of, there is conflict between like mother and daughter. And so yeah, I think it's so great to hear how it connects with your life too, and how you resonated with it as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
so thank you so much for sharing with us about that. It was very enlightening to hear you share about these keywords and how it's connected and the meaning that it holds in your life. I was hoping that we could have a little bit of time for Q&A right now. So I don't think we've received any questions yet. But audience, please feel free to share your questions with us. Okay, actually, we do have a couple that came in right now. All right, so for the first one, the first question asks, if you were to sum it up in just a few sentences, what does being Korean American mean to you?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. So I will just say that for the longest time, I felt like I couldn't say that I was Korean American because of, a lot of different experiences. So I have to like tell this first. Um, I felt like I had to put a disclaimer on it. I had to explain because I would get looks. It didn't
Mm,
matter, from what side of things looks like, wait, what? Like you're not what I think a Korean American should look like or sound like or be like, or you're not like other Korean Americans. And so for a long time, I felt like I couldn't say that. I would only say something like I'm mixed, I'm, some self-deprecating thing about myself. And so really it's only been more recently that I felt like I could claim that. And what's
mm,
kind of enlarged my understanding, I think, is learning more about different stories of Korean Americans, how wide the diaspora of Korean Americans are, that it includes many different experiences, meeting adult Korean American adoptees, meeting other biracial Korean Americans, meeting all different generations of Korean Americans, and realizing that our stories are very different, but we're connected, and that we are better when we are connected and our stories are connected. So all of that to say, I have just now started, I mean, I say just now, within the last 10 years of my life, been able to say without a disclaimer that yes, I am a Korean American. And so for me, that just means plainly what it is, a Korean that is also an American, and that my
mm,
Koreanness flavors who I am as an American. It's not discounts, but flavors and colors who I am as an American, and that as an American, it's just as much of an American experience as any other, if that makes sense. So that
mhm.
was a long, you can't ask a writer for a short,
No,
but yeah, it felt important to kind of talk about the
yeah.
backstory to that. So
Oh, yeah,
good
yeah.
question.
Oh, thank you so much for answering that. Um, so we have one more question. So this participant mentioned, thank you so much for sharing, Tasha. And as someone who has recently entered into a marriage with a non-Korean partner, I've found myself contemplating the dynamics of navigating cultural and racial identity within our relationship. How are you able to navigate your identity growing up in a multicultural racial family?
Yeah. That's great. Congratulations. By the way, did you say you're newly married? I don't know, maybe not.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Um,
recently entered into a
okay.
marriage.
Good. Congratulations. That's exciting. So growing up, I talk a lot about this in my book.
Mhm,
I grew up in a space, and nothing is perfect, but grew up in a space where really it felt very normal to be biracial. It felt very normal to have two cultures in our home, on our dinner, at our dinner table. And I did not experience any sort of, in the home at least, it was more after going out into the world. But in the home when I was young, that's just was our normal. And there was no kind of, you know, one parent or one part or one culture is lesser than the other. There was very much a celebration of just who we were. So I'm really thankful for that. But that also made it really hard going out to the world and seeing such a different environment, and kind of experiencing different sorts of hierarchies and just different, ways that people try to explain what normal is, and all of that. So my experience in the home was different than it was later. I will say that as a newlywed myself, and I also wrote about this in the book, but who is married to a white man, um, it was really difficult when we were first dating, even though I felt like I had come so far in owning my ethnic identity. There were a lot of things that came up in our relationship where I would still try to hide things. Thankfully, he was someone that didn't kind of let that fly. And we've grown together. So yeah, I mean, I think for us, it has just really it's taken a lot of time and a lot of honesty and a lot of pursuit of the other. And I guess this realization too, in marriage counseling, they talk about how you're marrying not just the person, but the whole family and all that comes with
Mhm.
it. But I think too, this realization, and we've talked about this even with our kids, this realization that you're also bringing in culture and forming and shaping culture. And so that's really important. And so thinking about how your actions either embrace or reject that in another person, that's going to have big impact. And so, yeah, so that's something that we've talked about a lot, but we've also just it's been slow and patient, and, we've had to circle back to things a lot. So, um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh, wow. I actually do remember reading some of the excerpts from your book as well. It sounds like your husband is such a supportive partner as well. And he's willing to, learn more about you, more about, the Korean culture, and kind of go where he may even at times feel uncomfortable, but he's willing to just try new things. And I feel like that's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay,
definitely.
so we're getting a few more questions in.
Yes,
So
please ask.
just a very fun one. So somebody asked, does Tasha actually like seaweed soup? Do you actually
I
enjoy
do.
it?
I do. I feel like, I don't know if you guys feel like this, but there's a lot of stuff that I like that I didn't like as a kid. I just was really picky when I was little, but that's aside from the like the rejection. I do
Mhm.
love it. Yeah, I do. And I have
Oh.
kids that love it too. So it's really fun to see that they are different than I was in that. So
Yeah. Oh, in the comments, I see Team Yakok.
sure.
Okay, so we have another question. So somebody asked in our chat, how does your daughter see her identity, and what insight can you share to youth in this generation?
Hmm. So I've got three. I don't know if I mentioned that I've got two boys and a girl. And I don't know, our daughter, I think with all of them, it's all very different. And that has actually, it's been really wild walking through this journey with them, because as they grow,
Mhm.
their identity is being shaped by many things, and they're learning about themselves, and they're all very different people. And so for all three of them, I think it's kind of been our thing to provide as many resources, as many books with representation, as many, I guess, pathways to their heritage that we possibly can. That goes for both sides. Although I would say that for us, the Koreanness is very strong. I don't know how else to say that, but that's how I was nurtured, how I was fed, how I was cared for by my mom. And so because of that, it's a lot closer to home. And so in providing just every opportunity we can to let them experience their heritage and different parts of it, but then also giving them space to own it as they will, and
Mm,
as they experience different things in friendships, in school, like they are taking in a lot of different things. And so it's hard to watch sometimes I kind of like sense like, oh my gosh, is that going to be like that experience? Is that going to be something that leads them toward rejection,
Yeah.
as far as their ethnic identity goes, or embrace? I'm always thinking about that. So I really have to like take a step back, because I don't want to put, while I want to be open about my story, I don't want to put that on them. So there's like two
Mhm.
things, like providing food, stories, people, experiences that will give them pathways to know where they come from, what their
Mhm.
heritage is, but
Mhm.
then also letting them be who they were made to be and who they choose to kind of or what the journey, I guess, that they're on, and the way that they choose to embrace it with time. So
Mhm. Yeah. So, in relation to this question, someone also asked, how do you intentionally promote your children's or your child's multiracial identity in your parenting? And I know you mentioned through stories, through food, by letting them kind of explore themselves. I'm wondering if there's any more that you could elaborate upon.
yeah, by those things, yes. And I think too, just being honest. And so even like when we just went to Korea in the fall, and it was the trip that we had planned pre-COVID that had to be canceled,
Mm.
because the world shut down. And so
Mhm.
we went, and 3.5 years ago, I had told myself when we canceled it, okay, now I have more time to learn Korean and be better, when we go. But that didn't really happen. There was a little bit of learning. And so when we were there, there was this moment where, there was something that happened and none of us understood what happened. And it was really humbling, because I think feeling like, oh, I'm the key here and I don't know. And so even in
Mm.
experiences like that, being honest with my kids, like, yes, you're still Korean. That doesn't mean that you know everything, about everything. Like there are a lot
Mhm.
of pieces to that. And some of that with the biracial experiences, that there's a lot of loss and there's a lot of things
Mhm.
that didn't fit,
Mhm.
and so for us being really honest about what that looks like, that, yeah, you look like this, like, and affirming like the Korean
Mhm.
traits that I see in them, but then also affirming the fact that there are other traits there too, and that's not bad.
Mhm.
Like, it's really beautiful to be both. And yeah, and just re-emphasizing, like, when language comes home, when there's language like, oh, like there was a kid at my son's school that told him, you're not a real Korean. And so just kind of talking about that, how did that make you feel? But also like kind of giving language to, you are whole,
Mhm.
even if you're mixed, you are a whole person. And yes, you are Korean, you are different than that classmate, but you still are. So just kind of
Mhm.
speaking back to things that aren't true, but listening to, and just trying to navigate as we go. It's really hard. And parenting is
Yeah.
so,
It's
there's I feel like you're constant on the job training, so
Oh yeah,
yeah.
it's tough, but what I'm hearing is, having these honest conversations, communicating, listening, and validating. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you do have a few more questions. So somebody also asked, how do you see storytelling show up in your day-to-day life?
Hmm. Well, I'm always thinking when I meet someone new, and this might be super weird, I don't know. I'm always wondering, it's just always there. I'm wondering, what's their story? What's the story behind our interaction, or just even their face, not to be
Mm,
weird, but it's just kind of always there for
mm,
me. I've always wondered that ever since I was little, probably because I was always trying to figure out my own. Um,
mm,
but then in day to day, when I am with people, I'm kind of always looking for that at the same time,
mm,
not, as a means to an end, or just because I want to be nosy or something like that, but really just in an interaction with someone, I want to get a glimpse of their story, not just kind of interact and miss it. And so,
mhm,
and then on top of that, I've said this a lot, I've talked about this before, but I really view storytelling as a practice of hospitality and
mhm,
generosity. And so the way that works both ways, I just see it as um, not in a let me talk about myself kind of way, let me just keep talking and share my story, but is this an opportunity for me to feed or nourish someone else? Can part of my
mm,
story fit here? but also in the same turn, like, can I receive someone else's? And so when I think about it that way, it just kind of becomes like, welcoming someone into your home or
Mm,
entering someone else's home and being
mm,
respectful of, being in someone else's space. And so, um,
mm,
yeah, I try to bring it with me all the time, even if we can't share big stories, but
mm. I love that. It's beautiful. And that's kind of how Chong grows, right? Within the community or within strangers through your stories, sharing your experiences or your day to day. All right, so we have about 2 more questions left. So someone has asked, do you have siblings? And if so, what did conversations with them look like regarding culture? And if not, did you have friends or community around you that were also Korean American?
Mhm. So I have an older sister, but we are half sisters, and like almost 10 years apart. So she remembers like me as a baby. And then like we just didn't grow. We didn't do life together in the way that you would
Mm,
with a sibling that was a similar age.
mm,
And so a lot of what we would talk about as adults, I guess, as young adults, or when I was a young adult and we would call each other on the phone, a lot of it was this is what mom did. And just kind of like just so connected through our mom and the things that we were trying to figure out, like how do we respond to this? Like, this seems like it's upsetting, like trying to work through things together. So there was a
mm,
lot of that. I think it's actually taken, I mean, decades for us to realize we can have a relationship. I mean, not outside of that because that's always there, but that we are actually two people that can connect. So anyway, so we do sometimes talk about all of this, but we're very different people. So the way that I, want to know someone's
mm.
story and I'm like kind of obsessed. She's very different in that way. And so not that she's not interested in the stories, she is in people's stories.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
just approach it differently. So
yeah.
yeah.
It's
And then
different.
yeah, as far as other Korean Americans, I actually didn't really know any other. Well, when I was young, I lived in Japan and went to an international school. And so there were other Korean English speaking friends that I had there. Some were Korean American and just in Japan for a little while. Some were Korean, but English speaking, but didn't have any connection to the States. And then I went to an Asian American camp, like in junior high and high school in California. And it was actually Japanese American, but there were other Korean Americans there. And that was probably the first time that I encountered a large group of Korean Americans. And I also wrote about this in my book and other Asian Americans and felt at home.
Mm,
I had never been in a place that was predominantly Asian American and with a lot of other Korean Americans as well until that point. So
mm,
yeah, it was really beautiful. And it was like a I guess a picture of like this can be, there are places like this and this is
mhm.
like, where you don't have to
Yeah,
explain yourself everywhere.
right. Yeah, yeah. So we have one last question. So this participant asked, what resources have helped you on your mental health journey, if you're comfortable with sharing?
Yeah. Honestly, a lot of books, a lot of stories again, writing, and I've said this before, writing has been so transformative for me and really what
Mm,
that looked like for a very long time and still is just writing privately, like in a journal. That was when I started that practice and then went really clung to it.
mm,
I think that was like the first time I've experienced any kind of release. And this wasn't something that I was actually sharing with a lot of people. It was just in a journal, having to like kind of write down my honest thoughts, but then also revisiting like some memories that I didn't feel comfortable talking about, but could write down on the page. At that time, I had no idea that I was doing something that was helping my mental health. It just felt like I have to do this, or like it has to come out, or I'm not going to make it. It just felt like there was so much in there that it couldn't stay anymore. So
mhm,
yeah, there were years and years of journaling that I think looking back now, it's just been a lifeline to me. And
Yeah.
then I think, sharing with others that are safe and being in safe spaces. Um,
Mhm.
and also reading other books by Asian Americans, even if they're not specifically about mental health. I think it's
Mhm.
just helped me to see, that I'm not crazy about some things that have felt, crazy,
Mhm.
or have been named that in a bad way,
Mhm.
by others. But it's just kind of released some shame. It's given
Yeah.
me courage to talk
Yeah.
about the things that I didn't want to talk about with anyone before.
Yeah. It sounds like it's helped to kind of normalize some of those experiences for you. And I feel like a lot of people may feel that way reading your book as well. Because I know
Mm,
that it really did uh it was so powerful for me to read as well. And so much that I recognized that I didn't know how to even articulate into words, and you helped to do that. And
mm.
so Tasha, I'm just so grateful that you've shared with us your stories, and you've given us the words to express and articulate these experiences. My heart feels so full today, and I'm also very grateful for our audience for joining in as well. Thank you so much, Tasha.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for
Yes.
having me. Thank you to everyone that was.
Um, Before we get into our raffle activity, I wanted to share that Mustard Seed Generation, it exists to break down barriers to mental health. And I believe that a part of breaking down those barriers includes sharing our stories of struggle and triumph, and from hearing from one another the different stories, the different experiences. And for those unfamiliar with our history, MSG was founded in 2007 in response to the Virginia Tech incident that shook the entire nation and the Korean American community. And so soon after, a need was recognized to bring more awareness to the mental health, more awareness to mental health in our community and the Korean American and immigrant churches. So here we are today in 2023, and we see God's faithfulness in and through MSG. We've created programs, summits, and events, and space for the Korean American community to come together. And we hope to continue doing this for a long, long time. And we hope to continue bringing more needed and relevant topics and programs to the table. So I will be passing off the spotlight to our wonderful staff, Gloria, who will be sharing about ways to partner with us in our mission and our growth for the present and also the future well-being of the Korean American community. So thank you again, everyone.